What happens when Hollywood's most controlled leading man is pushed, live on television, to the edge of his patience, when smiles crack, silence screams, and one sharp question turns a friendly interview into an on-air explosion no one saw coming? Before we step inside that moment, before voices rise and chairs scrape against the studio floor, make sure you subscribe to Prime Talk right now, hit like, and drop a quick comment, because stories like this don't just unfold, they detonate. The studio lights were already blazing when Brad Pitt stepped onto the stage, that familiar mix of applause and awe rolling toward him like a warm wave. He smiled, that practiced, effortless smile that had carried him through decades of premieres, scandals, red carpets, and carefully worded interviews. The audience rose to their feet, clapping longer than usual, some whispering his name as if saying it out loud might make the moment more real. Brad gave a modest nod, a hand lifted in acknowledgement, eyes scanning the room before settling on the table where the hosts of The View waited. Whoopi leaned back with a knowing grin. Joy adjusted her notes. Sunny watched closely. And Sara Haines, smiling wide, alert, energized, leaned forward just a little more than the others. From the first second, there was electricity in the air. Not the dangerous kind yet, but the kind that hinted something unexpected might happen. Brad sat down, crossed his legs, relaxed his shoulders. He laughed lightly at Whoopi's opening joke, played along when the audience cheered again. The conversation started smoothly. His new project, the pressure of fame, the way time reshapes a career. Brad spoke calmly, choosing his words with care, his voice low and measured. He looked like a man in control. But control, especially live on television, is fragile. Sara tilted her head, nodding as he spoke, then jumped in with a question that sounded harmless at first. Brad, people have watched you evolve for years, she said, her tone bright, conversational. They've also watched you go through some very public personal changes. Do you ever feel like you owe the audience an explanation about who you really are now? Brad's smile tightened, almost imperceptibly. For a split second, his eyes flickered downward, then back up. The audience chuckled softly, expecting a reflective answer. He inhaled, slow and deliberate. I think, he said carefully, that people see what they see, and some things are meant to stay private. Sara nodded again, but she didn't retreat. Sure, she said, leaning closer. But when your personal life has been such a big part of your public image, isn't privacy kind of a luxury? The room shifted. A murmur rippled through the audience. Brad's jaw clenched, the muscle near his cheek pulsing once. Whoopi glanced sideways. Joy stopped shuffling her papers. Even the cameraman seemed to hesitate, the lens lingering on Brad's face a beat too long. I don't see privacy as a luxury, Brad replied, his voice still calm, but flatter now. I see it as a necessity. Sara smiled, but this time it didn't reach her eyes. Some people would say, she continued, that when fans invest emotionally in you for decades, they feel entitled to honesty, especially when the stories out there are complicated. There it was. The word hung in the air like smoke. Complicated. Brad shifted in his chair. His shoulders straightened, posture stiffening. Stories, he repeated slowly, aren't always truth. The audience gasped softly, sensing the tension climb. Somewhere in the back, someone whispered, "Oh." Sara didn't back down. But silence, she said, voice firmer now, can also speak volumes. Don't you think? Brad looked at her directly, really looked at her, and for the first time since sitting down, he didn't smile at all. I think, he said, each word precise, that silence can be an act of respect. For people who didn't sign up to sit at this table. The applause was scattered, unsure. Sara opened her mouth to respond, then paused, eyes narrowing just slightly. Are you saying, she asked, that the conversation itself is disrespectful? Brad exhaled through his nose, a breath heavy with restraint. I'm saying, he replied, that some lines shouldn't be crossed for ratings. The studio went dead quiet. You could almost hear the hum of the lights overhead. Whoopi leaned forward, ready to intervene, but Sara spoke first, her tone sharpening. This isn't about ratings, Brad. It's about accountability. When your choices affect others, people want answers. Something in Brad snapped, not explosively, not yet, but like a thread pulled too tight. He shook his head slowly. You're assuming things, he said, voice rising just a notch. And that assumption is exactly the problem. The audience reacted instantly, some clapping, others murmuring in discomfort. Social media feeds, unseen but already alive, began to buzz. Clips were being clipped, Words were being typed. The moment was no longer just happening, it was spreading. Sara crossed her arms lightly, maintaining her composure. I'm asking the questions people at home are thinking, she said. Isn't that what this show is about? Brad leaned back, eyes flashing. Not at the cost of human decency, he shot back. A sharp intake of breath echoed from the front row. Joy whispered something under her breath. Sunny stared straight ahead, lips pressed together. The energy had turned heavy, almost claustrophobic. Brad glanced around the table, then at the audience, as if realizing, all at once, where he was and how far this had gone. His hands rested on his knees now, fingers tense. I came here, he said, to talk about my work, not to be put on trial. Sara met his gaze, unwavering. Sometimes, she said quietly, those two things can't be separated. That was the moment. The invisible line. Brad's chair creaked as he shifted forward, his voice dropping but growing sharper. Then maybe, he said, this isn't the right place for me. The audience erupted, gasps, whispers, scattered applause, stunned laughter. Whoopi finally raised a hand, trying to calm the storm, but it was too late. The tension had reached a point of no return. Brad's expression was no longer guarded. It was raw, edged with frustration and something deeper. Hurt, maybe, or exhaustion. He glanced once more at Sara, then away, as if deciding something internally. The cameras zoomed in, catching the flicker of resolve in his eyes. And as the studio held its breath, no one yet realized that this was only the beginning, that the next move would shock everyone watching and change the tone of the entire show forever. Brad didn't stand up right away. That pause, those few suspended seconds, felt heavier than any shouted argument. The audience shifted in their seats, unsure whether to clap, to boo, or to sit in stunned silence. The cameras stayed locked on him, catching the subtle rise and fall of his chest, the way his fingers curled slightly against his knee as if holding himself back. Sara watched him closely now, her earlier confidence flickering, replaced by something more cautious. She hadn't expected this turn, not this fast, not this intense. Whoopi cleared her throat, her voice cutting gently but firmly through the tension. Okay, she said, lifting both hands. Let's take a breath here. Brad glanced at her, gave a small nod, but his eyes didn't soften. I am calm, he said, though the tightness in his jaw suggested otherwise. I'm just being honest. Honest. The word echoed strangely in the studio. Sara leaned back slightly, uncrossing her arms, choosing her next words with visible care. Brad, she said, lowering her tone, no one is questioning your right to privacy. But when public figures talk about growth and accountability, viewers expect transparency. That's not an attack, it's curiosity. Brad let out a short, humorless laugh. Curiosity, he repeated. That's one word for it. The audience reacted again, this time more divided. A few claps broke out, quickly followed by murmurs. Someone near the aisle shook their head. Another leaned forward, eyes wide, fully invested now. This was no longer an interview. It was a standoff. Sunny finally spoke, her voice measured, attempting balance. Brad, do you feel like you're being misunderstood right now? He turned toward her, grateful for the shift but still guarded. I feel, he said slowly, like I'm being reduced to headlines. Like no matter what I do or say, it's never enough, or it's too much, or it's somehow wrong. Sara inhaled, then leaned forward again. But isn't that part of the responsibility? She pressed. You've talked before about learning from mistakes. People want to know what that actually looks like. Brad's eyes darkened. Learning, he said, doesn't require public confession. Healing doesn't happen under studio lights. The room fell quiet again. Even Whoopi seemed momentarily unsure how to steer the conversation back to safer ground. The producers behind the cameras were likely gesturing, whispering urgently into headsets. This wasn't in the rundown. This wasn't controlled. Sara nodded slowly, but there was steel in her voice when she responded. For a lot of people watching, she said, silence from powerful men has meant avoidance. Can you understand why some might feel frustrated? That did it. Brad straightened, his calm finally cracking. I'm not a symbol, he said sharply. I'm a person, and I'm not here to represent every narrative you want to project onto me. A wave of reaction rolled through the audience, louder now, unmistakable. Some applauded loudly. Others gasped. A few shook their heads in disbelief. Sara's eyes widened just slightly, surprised by the force of his words. I'm not projecting, she shot back, her own frustration breaking through. I'm asking direct questions. That's my job. And I'm answering, Brad replied, voice raised now, no longer smooth. Just not the way you want. Whoopi leaned forward again, her voice firm. All right, let's slow this down, she said. We're starting to talk past each other. But the momentum had its own gravity. Brad shook his head, a bitter smile tugging at his lips. This is exactly why I hesitate to come on shows like this, he admitted. You come in good faith, and suddenly you're defending your humanity. The audience reacted strongly to that. Applause surged, louder than before, mixed with uncomfortable laughter. Sara glanced toward the crowd, then back at Brad. Her expression hardened, defensive now. So you're saying this is unfair, she asked. That you're being ambushed. I'm saying, Brad replied, that the conversation crossed from curiosity into judgment. Silence followed, thick and awkward. The kind that makes everyone aware of the cameras, the microphones, the millions of viewers watching from couches and phones and lunch breaks. Sara opened her mouth, then closed it, clearly recalibrating. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter, but no less intense. Judgment exists because actions have consequences, she said. Ignoring that doesn't make it disappear. Brad stood up. The scrape of his chair against the floor cut through the studio like a knife. The audience gasped in unison. Whoopi's eyes widened. Joy muttered, "Oh boy," under her breath. The camera pulled back slightly, trying to capture the full tableau as Brad rose to his feet, tall, rigid, unmistakably done. I think, he said, looking down at the table, then out at the audience, we're done here. Sara looked up at him, stunned. Brad. No, he interrupted, holding up a hand. His voice wasn't shouting, but it carried authority, finality. I won't sit here and be dissected for entertainment. Whoopi stood as well, instinctively trying to diffuse the moment. Brad, hang on, she said. Let's not end it like this. Brad met her eyes, his expression conflicted. For a split second, it looked like he might sit back down. The audience leaned forward collectively, waiting to see what he'd do. But then Sara spoke again, softer but pointed. Walking away doesn't answer anything, she said. It just adds another question. Brad closed his eyes briefly, as if steadying himself. When he opened them, there was resignation there, an understanding that whatever he did next would be interpreted, analyzed, judged. He picked up the microphone clipped to his jacket, unclipped it slowly, deliberately, and set it down on the table. I don't owe anyone my pain, he said quietly. Not here. Not anywhere. The studio erupted. Gasps, applause, shouts, all colliding into a chaotic roar. The producers were surely panicking now, cutting between camera angles, debating whether to go to commercial. Brad stepped back from the table, adjusting his jacket, his movements controlled but tense. As he turned toward the exit, Sara remained seated, staring after him, her expression a mix of disbelief and frustration. Whoopi called his name again, but he didn't turn around. And in that moment, mid-step, mid-breath, mid-broadcast, the question shifted from what had been said to what would happen next. Because Brad Pitt wasn't just leaving a chair behind. He was leaving a firestorm in his wake. Brad's footsteps echoed louder than they should have as he moved toward the edge of the stage, each step sounding like punctuation to an argument that had already gone too far. The audience was on its feet now, some clapping, some shouting his name, others calling out in disbelief. A few boos cut through the noise, sharp and uncomfortable. The energy in the studio had completely fractured, split between shock, admiration, and outrage. This was live television unraveling in real time. Behind the table, Whoopi turned toward Sara, her face a careful mask of control barely holding together. Okay, she said into the chaos, voice firm but strained. Let's take a moment here. Sara didn't look away from Brad as he walked. Her mouth opened as if to say something more, but no words came out. Her confidence from earlier had dissolved into stunned silence. Joy leaned in toward Sunny, whispering urgently, while Sunny stared straight ahead, her expression unreadable, fully aware of how quickly this moment was already escaping the confines of the studio. Brad reached the edge of the stage and stopped. That pause sent a ripple through the room. The audience hushed, sensing a possible turn, a final word. The cameras zoomed in, capturing his profile, the tension in his jaw, the crease between his brows. He turned slightly, not fully facing the table, but enough for his voice to carry. I want to be clear, he said, measured but heavy with emotion. Walking away doesn't mean guilt. It means choosing not to bleed in public. A wave of reaction crashed through the audience, applause rising, mixed with murmurs of disagreement. Sara finally stood, pushing her chair back. "Brad," she called out, her voice steadier now, though tinged with urgency. "No one asked you to bleed. We asked you to speak." Brad turned fully this time, eyes locking with hers. "And I did," he replied. "Just not on your terms." The tension between them felt physical, like a wire stretched to breaking. Sara took a step forward, stopping just short of the table. "When you come on a show like this," she said, "you know the questions won't all be comfortable." Brad nodded once. "Uncomfortable is fine," he said. "Disrespect isn't." The word landed hard. The audience reacted audibly, a collective intake of breath. Whoopi moved between them slightly, positioning herself as a buffer without fully inserting herself into the confrontation. "Let's all remember," she said carefully, "that this is still a conversation." Brad looked at her, his expression softening just a fraction. "I respect this show," he said. "But respect has to go both ways." Sara folded her arms again, defensive but composed. "From my perspective," she said, "asking about accountability is respect for the people affected by celebrity power." Brad's voice rose, not loud but firm, vibrating with restrained emotion. "And from my perspective, turning someone's life into a soundbite isn't accountability, it's exploitation." The audience erupted again, louder than before. Producers were almost certainly shouting into earpieces now, urging a commercial break, but no one moved. This was the kind of television you couldn't cut away from, even if you wanted to. Sunny finally stood, her voice calm but authoritative. "This is getting personal in a way that doesn't serve anyone," she said. "Brad, would you consider sitting back down so we can reset?" Brad hesitated. For a long moment, it looked like the fight had drained out of him, leaving only fatigue. He glanced at the chair he'd left behind, then back at Sara. "Resetting," he said quietly, "would mean pretending this didn't just happen." Sara met his gaze, her expression conflicted now. "Sometimes," she said, "that's how you move forward." Brad shook his head. "Sometimes," he replied, "that's how you bury things." The studio fell into an uneasy silence. Even the audience seemed unsure how to react now, caught between empathy and discomfort. Brad adjusted his jacket again, a nervous habit surfacing. "I've spent years," he continued, voice softer but still intense, "trying to do better without making a spectacle of it. Today feels like a step backward." Sara's voice softened in response, the edge finally dulled. "It wasn't meant to be," she said. "But intention doesn't erase impact." Brad nodded slowly, acknowledging the point without conceding. "Exactly," he said. "And the impact of this conversation is why I'm leaving." He turned again toward the exit. This time, there was no pause. Whoopi sighed audibly, rubbing her temple. Joy shook her head, lips pressed thin. The audience began to clap, tentative at first, then stronger, as Brad walked off stage, disappearing behind the curtain. The moment he vanished from view, the studio felt strangely hollow, like the air had been sucked out. Whoopi turned back to the table, addressing the camera directly now. "Well," she said carefully, "that was not how any of us expected today to go." Sara sank back into her chair, staring at the space Brad had occupied just minutes earlier. Her face reflected a mix of regret and resolve. "I stand by asking tough questions," she said quietly. "But I never intended for it to end like that." Sunny nodded. "This is the challenge of live TV," she said, "where real emotions meet real-time conversation." Behind the scenes, staff members rushed about, whispers and hurried footsteps filling the gaps left by Brad's exit. Phones buzzed nonstop. Clips were already being uploaded, captions being written, narratives forming at lightning speed. In living rooms across the country, viewers sat frozen, some replaying the moment, others rushing to social media to pick sides. Had Brad been brave for walking out? Or evasive? Had Sara crossed a line? Or simply done her job? Back in the studio, the hosts tried to regroup, but the atmosphere had irrevocably changed. The conversation moved on, but the weight of what had just happened lingered, pressing down on every word spoken afterward. And outside the studio walls, a storm was gathering, one that would stretch far beyond that stage, far beyond that day, carrying this confrontation into headlines, timelines, and debates that were only just beginning. By the time the show cut to commercial, the damage was already done. Phones buzzed violently in pockets and purses backstage, producers huddled in urgent circles, and assistants whispered into headsets with the kind of intensity usually reserved for breaking news. Brad Pitt's walkout wasn't just a moment, it was a rupture. And the aftershock was spreading fast. Inside the studio, the applause that followed the commercial break felt hollow, almost forced. The audience had returned to their seats, but the energy was fractured, unsettled. Some people stared at the empty chair Brad had left behind, as if expecting him to return. Others whispered furiously, already scrolling through social media, watching the clip replay in real time. The View logo glowed brightly behind the hosts, but the warmth of daytime television had vanished. Whoopi addressed the camera again, her voice steady but heavy. "We want to acknowledge what just happened," she said. "Live conversations can be unpredictable. Emotions run high. And sometimes, people walk away." Sara sat quietly beside her, hands folded, eyes down for a brief moment before lifting to face the audience. The confidence she'd carried earlier had transformed into something more complex, defensive, reflective, and visibly shaken. "I believe in asking difficult questions," she said carefully. "But I also respect when someone feels they've reached their limit." The audience reacted with mixed applause. Some clapped loudly in support. Others stayed silent, arms crossed, faces tight with judgment. There was no clear winner here, only discomfort. Backstage, Brad moved quickly down the hallway, his team trailing behind him. He didn't speak at first. His face was calm, but his eyes told a different story, tired, distant, weighed down by the knowledge that this moment would now live forever. A publicist finally broke the silence, asking if he wanted to issue a statement. Brad stopped walking. "Not yet," he said quietly. "I've said enough for today." Outside the studio, the world was already on fire. Within minutes, clips of the confrontation flooded every platform. Headlines began screaming in bold letters. "Brad Pitt walks out. On-air showdown. The View erupts." Comment sections exploded, lines drawn instantly. Some hailed Brad as courageous for refusing to be interrogated. Others accused him of avoiding accountability. Sara became a lightning rod too, praised by some for asking hard questions, condemned by others for pushing too far. Hashtags trended. Reaction videos multiplied. Body language experts weighed in. Former talk show hosts offered opinions. Celebrities subtly took sides with cryptic posts and vague quotes. The moment was dissected frame by frame, tone by tone, pause by pause. That night, news panels replayed the footage again and again. One commentator called it a rare crack in Hollywood's polished armor. Another argued it showed the growing tension between celebrity culture and public accountability. Psychologists debated whether walking out was an act of self-preservation or deflection. No one could agree, and that disagreement fueled the story even more. Sara watched the clips from home, replaying the moment Brad stood up, the scrape of the chair, the look in his eyes. She told herself she'd done her job. She told herself tough conversations mattered. But still, the silence afterward echoed in her head louder than the argument itself. Brad, meanwhile, stayed offline. No tweets. No Instagram posts. Just distance. Those close to him said he felt relief mixed with regret, not for leaving, but for how public pain always becomes spectacle. For how quickly nuance disappears once the cameras stop rolling. Days later, a short statement finally appeared from his team. It was calm, controlled, unmistakably Brad. He thanked the hosts, acknowledged the intensity of live discussion, and reaffirmed his belief in privacy and growth outside public judgment. It satisfied some, infuriated others. The cycle continued. On The View, the hosts addressed the incident one final time. Whoopi spoke about balance. Sunny spoke about responsibility. Sara spoke about reflection, about how live television doesn't allow rewrites, only consequences. The audience listened, but the magic was gone. Everyone knew this episode would be remembered for one thing and one thing only: an empty chair. In the end, no apology went viral. No reconciliation happened on camera. There was no dramatic reunion, no neatly tied conclusion. Just a moment that exposed something raw, about fame, about boundaries, about the cost of asking and refusing to answer. And maybe that's why it lingered. Because it wasn't scripted. It wasn't safe. It was human. Now it's your turn. Was Brad Pitt right to walk away? Or should he have stayed and answered the questions? Did Sara Haines cross a line? Or do celebrities owe the public honesty when the spotlight is this bright? Drop your opinion in the comments below, because this conversation is far from over. And if you want more explosive, cinematic, behind-the-scenes stories like this, Moments where celebrity masks crack and live television turns unpredictable. Make sure you subscribe to Prime Talk right now. Stay with us, because the next story might be even more shocking.